Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Captain.
It's great to be here. I was really hoping that I'd be in port by now and that I could grab a flight to Lisbon, but unfortunately 10-meter seas and 60-knot winds have delayed my progress, but I'm just so honored to be here.
Well, we would have loved to have had you here in person, but actually seeing you in situ, so to speak, is really excellent. Tell us where you are and where are you going?
I'm currently in the Southern Oceans, and we are on our way down to the Antarctic, where Sea Shepherd has a long history of fighting against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. A few years ago, we helped to shut down 6 illegal fishing boats that were fishing for Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish. We're heading back down to the Southern Ocean now to address some of the new and latest threats against the Southern Ocean ecosystem.
So we have in the room here, just so that you may know, there's a number of your colleagues and volunteers, and those of you who would like to find out more, they are here and will be at the exits at the end of our conversation here. But tell us, before we get on to important matters of policy and so forth, just tell us what it is like being on ship. What's your typical day like?
A typical day for us involves working together with law enforcement agents from our partner countries all around the world, but in particular around the coast of West Africa. We have a ship with a crew and the fuel, and our government partners come on board with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels for illegal fishing. And what's really fantastic is that we are able to generate tangible results in the fight against illegal fishing. Working together with 8 countries around the African continent, we've assisted those partners to arrest over 80 vessels to date. Those are real metrics of success that generate serious change for the oceans.
80 vessels, wow. So what are some of the examples of illegal fishing that you've come across, and who are the perpetrators?
When we talk about illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or so-called IUU fishing, we're talking about a whole slew of crimes. When we talk about illegal fishing, we're referring to vessels that are fishing without a license or fishing using particularly destructive and therefore prohibited fishing gear, vessels targeting endangered species or fishing in prohibited areas like marine parks or areas reserved for artisanal fishermen. And the country partners that we work with, these are countries that have economic resources that are stretched. And so we're able to provide this tool that is missing from the law enforcement toolbox, namely the vessel asset that can get the police to the scene of the crime. There's also the issue of licensed vessels that are maybe misreporting or not reporting what they're catching. And so to actually hold these operators accountable, there has to be the ability to board and inspect those vessels at sea. And then when we're talking about unregulated fishing, we're referring to the high seas. About 60% of the surface of the oceans is area that falls outside of national jurisdiction, areas that are regulated through so-called regional fisheries management organizations and other international intergovernmental frameworks. And that's an area that's very, very difficult to enforce any kind of law. If we look at who the perpetrators are, then I have to point a finger at the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China has the largest distant water fishing fleet in the world, and it ranks #1 in prevalence of illegal fishing. But if the European Union were a country, it would be the 2nd largest fishing fleet in the world. And because the European Union fishing fleet is at about 2.5 times the capacity of what could be sustainably fished in European waters, the European Union is exporting its overfishing problem to other areas of the world, and that includes West Africa.
So many here, I'm sure, in the audience have seen videos of your work, have heard you speak, but just give us a sense and perhaps take one of your most recent encounters as an example. Just what's it actually like? I mean, I'm assuming these ships, these vessels are not terribly best pleased when you rock up and interrupt what they're doing. So talk us through how this works.
I have a great example. Working together with the Liberian Coast Guard in West Africa, we came across a ship called the Libico II. This was a vessel that was legally licensed to fish in the waters of Liberia using long-line fishing gear. But once on board, the Liberian Coast Guard, assisted by Sea Shepherd Global, was able to discover that there wasn't a single long line on board this ship. There wasn't a single tuna on board either. this vessel was using illegal deep-sea gill nets to fish for endangered deep-sea sharks to produce shark liver oil. The Liberian Coast Guard was able to uncover a secret shark liver oil production facility, and from the cargo manifests seized on board, we discovered that this ship was offloading about 50 tons of shark liver oil every 3 weeks in the port of Dakar in Senegal. To produce 50 tons of shark liver oil takes the lives of 66,000 deep-sea sharks, which means that this one single ship on its own was killing 500,000 sharks every single year. The vessel was arrested by the Liberian Coast Guard for not fulfilling its licensing requirements for targeting endangered species. The ship was detained in the port of Monrovia in Liberia, and since that arrest, the ship has not fished again. That equates to millions of sharks saved because of the actions of the Liberian Coast Guard, supported by Sea Shepherd.
And how do you and law enforcement and other government partners work together? Clearly, this is an incredibly effective partnership. So talk us through what your roles and responsibilities are and how you work with them.
In many ways, it's similar to the kind of shipwrighter agreements that are signed by the U.S. Coast Guard and developing countries, or the Royal Navy and developing countries, except that in this case, it's a shipwrighter agreement between a civil society partner and a government partner. Essentially, we provide the ship, a vessel at a length of about 50 meters. We provide the operating crew, the engineers, the navigators, and our generous donors around the world, supported by our incredibly active onshore volunteers, like the people who are in the audience today. They're able to provide the fuel. And our government partners provide the law enforcement, from the Coast Guard sailors to the Navy sailors to the fisheries inspectors to the National Park Guards to the police authorities, the people with that authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels. And then we go on patrol under complete direction from the government. These are government programs. Essentially, we are providing the transportation and we are providing the training platform to build the capacity of the law enforcement initiatives. And then we measure our success by the number of criminal operations that we shut down. And these programs bring a lot to our host nation. Essentially, fines are generated from these vessels, which is critical revenue for the country. Those fines also create deterrence, which mitigates illegal fishing, which allows for the fisheries to recover, benefiting the local fishing communities, the artisanal fishing communities, and also seeing firsthand what's happening and what's being taken out of the sea. That allows our government partners to change the laws, to increase the penalties for illegal fishing, because in a lot of places, the penalty or the punishment simply does not match the crime.
I want to make sure that there's time here for questions, so that the lights are quite bright. So if you could put your hands up to see if there's anybody. Yes, there's a question here from a gentleman in the front row. Just while you get the microphone, one last one from you, Captain, which is, given all of that, how sort of optimistic are you about how much progress has been made and is going to be made?
I think illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and dealing with that challenge is one of the big challenges we have to face in protecting our oceans. We're dealing with an overfishing problem. I think everybody attending here knows that, with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization believing that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. And driving that, exacerbating that problem, is illegal fishing, which accounts for 20% of the global catch of fish. For Sea Shepherd, we feel, well, if we're going to deal with the overfishing problem, then we can start with the operators that are in violation of the law, where we already have the law on our side. If we can remove the illegal fishing component, that takes away 20% of the global fishing effort, and that will allow the oceans to recover. Of course, we've got the problem of climate change making all of these issues worse. And in the area where I spend most of my time working in West Africa, it's expected that fish populations could fall by 90% by the year 2100 due to climate change alone. So that's not even taking into account overfishing and illegal fishing. So for the oceans to really have any chance at all, we need to eliminate these other risk factors so that we can create ecological resilience, so that fish populations can survive climate change.
Sure. There's a huge amount to do, and we've been discussing a lot of that this morning, but you're making really important progress on an important element of it. Yes, go ahead with your question, sir.
Peter Neal, World Ocean Observatory. You mentioned the two key areas, the Chinese, which is basically a phenomenon controlled by government, but the EU is different. If I understand it, that through flags of convenience, interlocking directorates, perverse subsidies, that the fishing fleet in Europe is privately owned. And the owners are identifiable. And it may well be that the fight on the front line is as much at sea, but also in the courts of Europe, where these laws are being, and policies are being irresponsibly and invisibly flaunted.
I think that's an absolutely astute observation. I think if there was actual free market competition out here at sea, then there'd be a lot less fishing. And fishing vessels are staying out longer and going out further to catch ever diminishing numbers of fish. And there are certain fixed costs associated with running a fishing vessel. A fishing vessel is going to burn the same amount of fuel every day. They're going to go through the same amount of fishing gear every single year. And so the only cost that a fishing operator can really cut is labor costs. And that's why we're seeing increasing problems of human trafficking involved in the fishing industry. But the other thing keeping these operators afloat is subsidies. We have subsidies for ship construction in Europe. We have subsidies for fuel in Europe. And these subsidies create unfair competition advantages for the European operators. It's very difficult for a West African operator to start their own local fishing business and compete with a 65, 75 meter European purse seiner for which the fishing license is paid by European taxpayers. I think if we were to remove the subsidies, if we were to ensure that labor practices are fair and also legal, we would get rid of a lot of this overfishing problem. But you're right, the fight is not just at sea. The fight is in the halls of power in Paris, in Madrid, and most certainly in Brussels.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there another question here from anybody? Okay, excellent. I get to ask it then. My last question from me is about technologies, because one of the things we've been learning about in the last few days is the impact that technology is having on all aspects of the ocean and what we can do there. But in your particular area, in terms of addressing underregulated and illegal fishing, we've seen a lot has happened thanks to technology already. What are the next things that you are hoping for technological solutions for?
Certainly technological solutions have increased the ability for law enforcement agents to pursue illegal fishers. There are international regulations that require ships of a certain tonnage to have mandated transponders, what's known as automatic identification systems. So you can go on a computer and you can look at tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vessels operating around the world because each one of these ships has a location transponder that is transmitting their identity and where they are fishing. But that said, there are a lot of loopholes to that. And one is that this transponder can simply be turned off by the fishing vessel at sea. And out of the 80 vessels that we've assisted our government partners to arrest, the vast majority of them did not have these location transponders turned on. Satellite imagery is certainly changing the game quite a bit, but there's a delay in the ability to receive the satellite images. And at the end of the day, I think intelligence has to be actionable. It's all well and good for these developing countries to know that there is a problem offshore, but if they don't have the vessel assets to actually interdict and to bring in those operators, take them to court and make them accountable, thereby deterring any future offenses, then the satellite imagery is just reinforcing the picture that there's a problem out at sea. There is a trend to kind of see technology as a magic bullet solution. I don't think that it is. I think it's an absolute force multiplier that can make us more effective at sea, but we cannot forget traditional law enforcement tools and tactics. We cannot forget the fact that the police on the ground still need to be able to get to the scene of the crime to apprehend the culprit.
Thank you. Captain Peter Hammerstead, thank you for the wonderful technology that has worked. You're clearer than I often am in my editorial calls with my colleagues, and I'm extremely envious of your study. It looks wonderful out there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.